This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development, providing graduate-level education to working professionals, online, on campus, and on-site. For more information, please visit study.stanford.edu.
Talk about here real. Today we have Gayna Williams from Microsoft, and as I think I said last time in saying she was going to be here, that when you're dealing with something of this size and scope, the nice techniques that we teach in our courses don't just work. You really have to think very differently. And she actually had her degree, I just learned at lunch, in kinesiology. She got into thinking about computers through the human factors direction. So starting from the beginning with a perspective that's really about people and what they do, and then bringing that to Microsoft, which of course, at least in the start, was about computers and what they do. And so she'll be talking about what they did in making the user research process work for Vista, which we are all going to have soon, right?
That's right.
The microphone is primarily for the
external.
For the recording, not for the...
But he sounded louder than I sang. He has a big booming voice. Okay, so thank you, Terry, for inviting me down to talk with you today. And I'm happy to share with you some of the understanding of sort of how we have been understanding people and users and customers and trying to integrate it and implement it.
Like it's actually been
Sorry, you were right.
Just make sure. Okay. Good.
Now, it still doesn't sound, it sounds a bit different to me now. Okay. All right, so I'm happy to talk to you about all the different, how we had to approach user experience and user research on a project like Windows. Just before I go into that, I just kind of thought I'd give it a short background to who I am, beyond doing some kinesiology and transportation research quite a long time ago. I joined Microsoft in '94, which was, we were very excited about CD-ROM products at the time. And we were all focused on shrink-wrap products, pretty much standalone products that would work on PCs. And so there was a certain set of techniques and how we went about doing it. And you know, customers would come along, they would buy the products, install them on the machines, and you know, and that was the environment we lived in. Also, like at that time, it's often really hard to remember what life was like without the internet. But at Microsoft, I forget the year, it was around '96 that suddenly corporate headquarters had access to the internet and could see content on the internet, which that was an era when we started to get different types of feedback, and the engineering teams started to hear a little bit more feedback about how people were understanding and perceiving their products. Because until then, they really were only looking at email sources coming into them. And so during that phase, I was working on products like NetMeeting and Internet Explorer. And it was pretty interesting during that time we started to release our products, our beta products over the internet, so people could install them sooner than the era where we had to actually send out disks, which really restricted the amount of feedback we could get from customers. Also in that time, you know, reviewers would take a look at the betas and actually give us feedback and critiques on sort of what they thought of the betas within sort of a week of the beta going out. And again, that time frame really changed, and how engineering teams think about responding to that feedback also shifted in the way that we were considering development of products. And of course, I don't need to say anymore, because you know where we are today with blogs, betas that go out to sort of as many users as want to download them worldwide, news groups, chats, reviews, and there's just so much information now that can go backwards and forwards between the engineering team and customers that it also continues to change the dynamics with which we develop products and deal with the feedback that's coming in. So that's sort of who I am in terms of sort of the broad range of products I've worked on, but also sort of during that time frame, seeing very big shifts in how we do user research and how we try and integrate customer feedback into the development cycle. So I should tell you something about the team that I have. I had a team of around 20 user researchers that came from backgrounds like anthropology, usability, HCI programs, data miners, and project managers. And so we were very much focused on delivering outstanding Windows client experiences through a deep understanding of people, which is very appropriate for this particular seminar, being design, people, and computers, though I'm not sure of the actual order of the words. People first. But of course. And the sort of the important thing to see on this slide is people. Again, in engineering and in development, often usability and user research techniques are very much around the user, who is the end user of the product, as opposed to the customer, who is often seen as the purchaser of systems, the purchaser of computers. So in some cases, it is the same person. In many cases, when you're developing software for a very broad audience, including enterprises and such, they can be distinct people. But at the end of the day, it's people. We have to understand people, where they fit in the entire system, and figure out how we can leverage that understanding to build better products and experiences. The other thing to notice is that we also have partner experiences. When you're building Windows, the success of Windows isn't just we can develop Windows like an isolated product. It is very dependent upon how we work with ISVs, IHVs, the manufacturers, how we work with other groups within Windows, because that's what people's perception is of what the experience should be. And so we have to help consider the whole ecosystem of how can we improve the overall experience. We also started to consider 3 goals whenever we approached our research. The first one actually is pretty straightforward in terms of, look, our job is to integrate whatever method it takes, whatever way and a data source we can get to understand customers and integrate it into the engineering process. I'll talk a little bit more about the engineering process as we go through the slides. But at the end of the day, our objective is to impact engineering, because that's where the product is being built and that's where we can make change happen for the users. The second point was often in user research, there's always a discussion around return on investment. Well, I've stopped trying to define return on investments in terms of dollars and actually really think about return on investment in terms of when we launch into understanding customers in some way, how can we maximize that understanding by leveraging it in terms of the groups that we give that information to. And you'll see as we go through some of our research plans what I mean by that. And then the third goal we always had to think about was educating the development team, the engineering teams we work with, because at the end of the day, the more we could create an environment where the engineering team was sympathetic towards all these particular groups, the user groups, customers, and partners, then the more receptive they are when the feedback comes in to make the right changes, the more they might consider to check to find out if there is customer information around a particular issue when they're discussing it in the heat of the moment to make a very important decision. And so it's when you're working in an engineering team, it's important for you to really think explicitly about how that communication is going to be going out, because it's the marketing of the work that happens inside to get full value from it. So I have, for the team, we have a general user research framework. And this, I'm not big on frameworks and models, because the moment you create them, you always think of the example that doesn't quite fit in. And And then we try and sort of move things around. But this is essentially how I've sort of gone through things. Is, first of all, I think in terms of 2 cycles. There's the product cycle, which is all about the building of the product. So in that area, we're often looking at predicting user behavior. But then there's this other part, which is real time. This is what's happening while we're building the product. And from here, a lot of the activities we can leverage to inform the development of the product in the top cycle. Now, this has been a lot of the traditional user research and usability work has happened in this area. This is where you can leverage a lot of your regular methods, the lab studies, low fidelity prototypes, focus groups, heuristic reviews. I mean, there's a huge amount of work. This is what HCI and usability has been really extremely good at doing. And we have very well-formed methods in that space. But as I said, it's quite narrow, because you're thinking about features, and features can be quite big. We have feature teams, like storage would be considered potentially a feature area. Then there's this very critical other part of experience that relates to adoption and use of a product, which really are like, it's an end-to-end experience. It's like storage. People don't think, hey, I'm going to go store stuff today. Their tasks are much bigger than that, how they think about things. And so that's where we start to think in terms of, so what are the overall objectives of people? Then we look at things like desirability and productivity. They don't stand alone. It's actually how the user engages across the entire product or across the system that will actually make up those emotions and that experience. And this one, I would say, today, like within the methods, we're still poking around in that area. Like we've got, I'm going to explain a few ways that we went about doing it, but they're still evolving the processes and ways to look at experience there. Then if I go back to the real time, again, I would consider like a narrow perspective looking at the product, because field work has happened for some time, but often with field work, you can go very much after just understanding the particular product or the particular area that you're actually working on and get very focused on it. Now that's good because you can get a lot of feedback specifically about what you're building, but you are going to be sort of focused in a primary area versus what I kind of call just life, which is where our ethnographies happen, where we'll often go out and study audiences and groups very holistically. You know, we'll go out and we don't go in with an intention of this is directly related to the improvement of Windows. It can be we'll go out and understand just how are people behaving. You know, maybe how is technology appearing in people's lives, and then that will also then inform the other areas. But one of the important things to realize is, like here, I have the synthesis of research, and that is leveraging all the data and information that can come back from any of these other areas, because that is actually where much of the real changes in the engineering happen. So we're always trying to impact that, but we do it from understanding and leveraging a lot of insights that come from the other spaces. So to start with, we did a lot of work. Just who are we building the product for? So we were looking at personas. Now, how many of you have worked with or heard of personas? A few, okay, a few. Ah, some big hands at the back. So personas are something we've been using at Microsoft now for a number of years. And what we like to look at is where we got started. We worked with the product marketing team to try and figure out the audiences that we considered were important to the development of Windows Vista. And important can come from several different perspectives. Are they going to be critical to purchasing the product? Are they an influencer? Are they a barrier to the product going out? And so the importance of like trying to use a persona is it creates some single people that you can rally a development team around to think about. Because what we've had in the past is we used to use like beginner, novice, intermediate, and expert user. And these terms, when the developers would use them back and forth between each other, they had different ideas of what a beginner user was, although they used the same word. So with the development of personas here, we came up with our set here that really helped the development team understand who we were focusing on. And so if you were to go to the Windows team at the moment and ask them to identify any of these characters, they would be able to give you their name. Well, most of them would. Because we have Ichiro, who is our IT pro. We had Nicholas, who was, he worked in a corporation and he was an early adopter. Patrick was the small business owner who liked gadgets. Sandra was a late adopter. Melissa worked hard in enterprises, was always on traveling with her laptop, moving around. Abby was a stay-at-home mom, and Toby was the teenager. And of course, we had to keep moving people away from Toby because he was very attractive to design and develop for, because, back to all the other groups. But the nice part about using the personas was now when you had two engineering teams meet and they wanted to talk about a particular feature, they would have a common language to use. And it worked so well that even our executives were picked up the language of personas because they wanted the consistency. But it wouldn't be strange to hear the VP asking somebody in a technical review, so, will Abby be seeing this dialogue? To which the technical lead would say, no, this isn't an Abby dialogue. And it really would ground people in understanding who these people were. I also include down here was one of the things we found with the development of personas was not to use the professional model pictures, because the development team really had to sort of understand and believe these people were real. We tried initially to use a stock set of photographs, but the development team just didn't believe it because they're like, come on, this is like marketing push, because the pictures look too familiar. So we actually had to go out and find people who somewhat resembled who resembled some of the characteristics. And also by selecting our own people, we got to take many more photographs of them so that we were able to use in communications to keep reminding people of who personas were. So once we'd established this set of personas, the question was, what experiences do these people want? And the creation of sort of how you prioritize what you're going to build, it comes from many different sources and is a creative process in terms of what do we know that people have got problems with today, where do we think their needs are heading, what can the technology do moving forwards, what are the sort of the common tasks that people do that we think we have a technology that could actually improve. So there are many different needs that come together that get discussed, but having the personas helped in the prioritization of whether we felt it would actually fit in with somebody's real need. Now, as a research team, and again, I'm not going to go into detail over like the development of individual features and the specifics, but you have to imagine that throughout the development of Vista, user researchers were working extremely closely with the feature teams, with the design team, interaction design team, and the development team on constant iteration of the actual feature level work. But the things I'm going to try and cover are more in the other areas because that's what holds together the higher level view of the user experience. So we looked at defining measurable experiences. Because we're part of the engineering team, we always have to try and figure out how can we convert our understanding of users into a mechanism where we can track success and failure, and we can convert our understanding into bugs. Because if we can convert it into a bug, then it can get onto the work list, which means it can be fixed. And so that's the constant sort of the challenge is trying to, again, convert our general understanding of customer needs and customer wants, but turn it into an actionable item for the development team. So this is just a particular example of where we were looking at things like photos and video was a particular area that we knew we were going to do some work in. And we knew that we'd think that, you know what, it's going to be, we want Abby and Toby to be able to complete some tasks in this area because we can see it fitting in with sort of their overall life and what they're interested in. So a particular task we might look at is like, you know, they should be able to download photographs and email a photo to a friend. Now, I know these aren't particularly riveting, overly exciting tasks, but we've always got to make sure people can do these tasks. And that's part of our job. And what you probably don't, it seems simple enough, this particular task, but what it actually does is it crosses several feature teams across a couple of divisions in order to deliver the experience. So we have the team that creates, that allows you to download the photographs. We have the team that builds Windows Mail. And then we also have the team that creates the storage. So when you're doing the selection of photographs, there's that element of the UI. And while it may seem straightforward to say, okay, we've got the three teams, like no problem, we'll be able to deliver on this. Well, our attention is to the overall flow between. And it's amazing in software and in systems how often you end up hitting a seam between two applications. And so it was one of our jobs was to just constantly go across the experiences to make sure that we got rid of the seams. The design team was also doing the same from a design perspective to make sure that everything flowed across and it felt a cohesive experience. So from there, we then had to create some goals and actually have some performance metrics in place. Now our goal was to run evaluations at the end of each milestone to give us a constant measure. And so we did this, like, this is where art meets science. In terms of, we wanted to have measures, but at the same time, we know, like, that the results come back in terms of sort of some of the issues, or are they in the right ballpark for success? And so, simple enough, green, yellow, red, they could tell if they were on track. But of course, you know that one of the best times to actually impact change is obviously during the very early stages of development when you don't even have any code to evaluate or any code to test with real users, which meant we had to do a lot of evaluation work. Well, of course, we hit some issues and challenges in terms of evaluating work when it hadn't actually been built. And you try giving somebody a red face when they haven't actually quite finished the work. I mean, it's the same as, yeah, that essay you're about to write isn't going to be good, so I'm already grading you on it now. So we had to come up with some more ways to try and help provide that feedback into the engineering process, but also manage expectations. So we ended up we developed some coded bars, which helped to explain how much of the product had been coded, how much was still in plan. And this was, again, it was buying us credibility with the development team because they then they could accept this. Because now they're like, okay, so, you know, the top one, that's okay. The top one with being green, some of it's in code. The plans are all looking good, that's why it's in yellow. The one down below is, okay, we don't hold out much hope for that experience. Some of it's in code, which obviously means that we're missing our opportunities to change. But if there's a big red part, that would also mean, you know what, maybe we haven't made the decisions about how we're going to finish the feature. And we just wanted to keep things very open and clearly communicated, because so often that we leave our evaluation work too late and haven't kept people abreast of where we think the experience is going. That this was a way for us to raise that visibility. And so over time, we were able to constantly provide updates on sort of where the experience was going. So obviously, as we moved through the product cycle, we were able to get to the point of just going with the code to help people understand where we were at. When we were doing the benchmarking types of tasks, of course, we were leveraging the personas heavily because we created screeners around them. And so, again, the development team got very familiar with using their particular names. Now, this slide demonstrates the integration of our usability research methods into the actual overall engineering process, which was one of the first times within Windows that we've actually been able to integrate usability into core engineering processes, which is pretty significant because there, again, within the engineering team, there are very established methods of looking at reliability, security, performance. And yet there's this recognition that, user experience should be part of that, but how can it be part of that? Because many of these other groups actually have automated methods. But because we've been pretty rigorous with our actual approach overall and looking at experiences, we were able to sort of participate in the overall final stages of the engineering process, which gave us an ability to sign off on the usability quality of the product. And also, this is another point of integration and a new direction for getting feedback, was because we developed this set of scenarios, a set of tasks that numbered, there were more than 150 tasks we were looking at. Frequently we were being asked, so what are the top tasks we're looking at, the top scenarios we're looking at in Vista? And often they would come to us to establish that list. When we were doing a large beta deployment, the teams that are managing the betas have a lot of tools now to engage and interact with our beta users. So they were able to leverage the list that we had to help the beta users test and evaluate much more the areas that we considered were high priority areas. And so again, that's the interaction now between what we need to do and understand from user research and how we integrate with the overall engineering processes, and how we're now getting a larger set of viewers to actually engage in experiences that we think are important. So that creates the basic metrics overall for sort of looking at experience. But the question is, like, as I said, there's much more to it than just, like, can people be successful as they go through things? So what should the experience feel like for these people? You know, and this is a harder area to come up with, with numbered definitions. So, because we know that all these things down here and more of them really contribute to whether you really engage with something at the end of the day or whether you reject it. So a couple of people on the team, Joey Benedict and Trish Miner, started to look at different ways of trying to elicit that information, and so they developed something called the Desirability toolkit, which is an extremely simple tool that basically we have words on cards. Here are some of the words. And we had people just go through a set of cards, pulling out the words that they were particularly interested in that related to their experience. And we were able to use this kit on XP, and we were able to use it during the development of Vista, and we could use it at the end of Vista. But of course, the development team were very interested in, okay, who picked what words and how many people picked which words, which of course wasn't the point of the exercise. People would pick out the words. The most important part came when we actually said to them, okay, let's look at what words you've selected now and tell me why you selected the words. Because this then helped facilitate that conversation around what was meaningful to them. And so we've used this a number of times. And why it's important to look at the themes and actually not at the words was a particular example when we used the tool. This was in a lab situation. A person had pulled out the card optimistic, to which the team was very excited because they were just very happy that somebody had said, hey, you know, like optimistic associates with me, you know, and the product. When they went through the discussion, the guy pulled the card out and he said, yeah, I picked optimistic because if Microsoft thinks that they can build this, they're really optimistic. So that was a really important point of, like, why you have to get to the why rather than what people select. We then, because the tool was pretty useful, was very useful to us, we then developed an online version so that we could use it in all the studies we were running, and we could also use it online with external people. And again, this is that integration of different data sources. So when we were running those benchmark studies, we did the toolkit. One of the problems, though, of running the toolkit at that time was you're running it on people who've got a very restricted view, because you've set the task, they're not getting free exploration. But at the same time, when I have somebody who's really focused and trying to understand desirability across everything, they can then integrate all the different sources and feeds to try and build the bigger picture. And so we were always looking, as we went through the different beta cycles as well, what the trends were in terms of sort of the positive feel and negative feel and what we could do to address it. Also, the more that we're working now, we're working on user research across the board, I believe, has really had to branch out to understand international audiences. And so we also had to develop a number of our tools and actually localize them, because especially on something like desirability and visuals, which we use this toolkit heavily for, there are cultural differences, and we wanted to stay familiar with what we thought those were going to be. So we had to localize the tool. Hey, sorry, here comes at the end of the day, like, smiley faces contribute a lot, so we do tend to use them in different places. And we had a tool that we called Send a Smile, which was a tool we developed because how do you catch those spontaneous moments when you're in the middle of using something and you have a happy moment or you have a grumpy moment? And so we wanted a tool that once we got to beta, we could give to users to be able to give us that particular information and send it back to us. So the tool just sat in the taskbar, and it was a green and red little face, so that when you had one of those moments, you could click on it, it popped up one of these dialogues. It did just a screen capture and allowed people just to type in a comment. And then so that was the only information we actually needed. Now we do have many more technical tools for our technical beta audiences to provide us feedback. But because some of our audiences we were dealing with were consumers, they don't know how to fill in more. They don't know how to file a bug, basically. And so they would send us information through this particular tool. But the challenge then for people loved this tool. People wanted within the company, we should send it out broadly. We should send it out to many more people. But of course, one of the challenges of the tool is you need somebody at the other end to actually do the integration and data analysis. And I would say that's still an area that we've got some challenges with, is quality interpretation of sort of verbose data into something that is truly actionable. So how our approach was we had a triage process in place where the issues would come in, we would identify whether it was a bug or a good comment. And if the issue looked like it was a bug, we then had to, our tool we integrated with Product Studio, which is our bug tracking database tool, so that we could file the bug and use the information we had here. So again, as we're developing our user research tools, we always have to think about the integration into the development tools to create a closed loop, because if it doesn't make it onto the work list, it's not going to happen. Again, another tool that we actually had to localize because we had to work on it ahead of time. So just another area that we're moving into now, and the web world has had this for a long time because of weblogs and being able to analyze sort of click-through paths and where information is. But for Windows, we had some challenges. Windows hasn't been instrumented before. And so there's a lot of information that we just don't know about what's happening on people's machines. And so we were challenged with, what can you do something while we're working on Windows Vista to help us understand what's happening on people's machines? And so first of all, we had to figure out how we were going to find participants. And the team that worked on this particular project, the types of data that we wanted to be able to gather were we had to deal a lot with legal, because if you're trying to take information off people's machines, you really have to know what you're doing. And then so we also worked with people who sign a a legal agreement so that they know the types of information we're taking from their machines. And a lot, what we were able to do was to collect, the next part of it was how to install the application that we could use to collect the data from machines. And that was one of our advantages in terms of we built something that was just a feedback panel scheduler, which allowed us to determine when we wanted to collect data and also how to upload tools to do data collection. And then we have a set of tools that were able to collect things such as registry settings, files that were already on the machines, crash information, which we can already get back through an alternative source. But it also allowed us to be flexible in terms of changing some of the information we collected. Because one of the challenges with a lot of the instrumentation type of data is you have to decide up front the type of information you want to gather. And what happens is, as you're developing a product, you start to ask a slightly different question. And it's hard to get the two in sync. Whereas if you have something more flexible, as you change the question, you can change the type of data you're collecting. And so it was an interesting perspective of being able to have to collect information from a large number of machines. And that didn't go into necessarily helping us understand what the user was doing, because that's one of the issues with instrumented data, is it just tells you what actually happened as opposed to what was the intent behind it. But it definitely helped us understand a lot about what was going on in the machine, and also helped us design certain parts of the user interface, because we had to know what kinds of files we were dealing with, what kinds of handlers we may have been dealing with, and there are parts of the UI where that was important for us to know. So the other part, because we had a panel that had signed up to participate in this program, we were also able to then survey them as well around different attributes and different issues. So that integration also did provide some interesting insights when you get that integration together. Now, one of the final sort of areas that I talk about, and ethnographies and beta deployments, all our field work, again, it happens continuously. Often people talk about doing field work at the beginning of a cycle and then maybe at the end, but we ran it continuously throughout the development cycle. So the ethnographies is probably one of the areas where we decided not to necessarily focus with personas, because personas we'd already decided who we were interested in looking at, whereas we wanted to step back to a higher level of just looking at audiences. So we did work with consumers, small businesses, and enterprises. And we did small business project was in particular, we did a project we called Dawn to Dusk. Because of the importance of working with small businesses, it was like small businesses never stop working. And so one of our ethnographers would, one of her businesses she was studying, she would just hang around outside until they would let her in through the door in the morning into their house, and then she was with them until they really didn't want her around anymore in the evening. So she really saw their full cycles of what went on, how they were trying to do work with the phone while they were dropping the kids at school, while they were picking up something from another contact. We also looked at the enterprise space as well, and that's the first time sort of one of the ethnographers, she said, can I get a business class ticket because the person I'm studying is flying to London on Wednesday? To which it was like, well, it's part of the research. And activity happens throughout, and that's where you get the insights of, the challenges of working on the plane or going through security. And while not every observation leads to a feature improvement, it really broadens our perspective of how things are truly being used in context. And that's such an important understanding when we're trying to create and understand how our products are fitting in. We also did a lot of international work with ethnographies, because the international work really comes out in when you start to see people's cultural patterns and behaviors on a regular basis. It's less in how they use the software, because how they use software has been predetermined by who built the software. But what we want to do is understand sort of, again, the context that it was built in, it is being used in. And we also did some exploratory ethnographies where it was like, there's some, when we're looking at wireless, it was well, where is wireless being used and not being used? And this was about 2002, 2003. And so we spent times at truck stops. Who would have guessed the truckers were one of the early adopters of wireless technologies? But they were. And so we could understand and see sort of the challenges they had and how they overcame them, and then think about, well, how does that relate to how other people may end up adopting them? Or how the environments in coffee shops change. You know, I'm sure you've all experienced now, everybody's like looking for the power outlet at airports and coffee shops, and sort of what does that mean to the coffee shop environment? What does it mean to them as a small business? You know, how do they maintain their wireless networks and such? And that then again, it's providing this very rich picture that we have to think about when we're trying to use products within it. And then, of course, as we went through the product cycle, we get to the end of finally we have betas we can actually have people use. And so there's the people who naturally install betas, especially in operating system, tend to be a little bit on the technical side. It helps probably if you're on the technical side. So we got very much involved with our the beta program team because we had to step in to help run a consumer program. Because the types of people who we know will be using it in their homes, again, is a very different audience. And so we worked with, we had several sites across the US where we worked with these people for about 18 months as they were trying to use our betas, and then as they were using our betas. It was great. They were able to provide feedback constantly. But of course, while they were out there, one of this is the integration of all the tools. The beta provided a very nice panel of people that we can get feedback from. So then we could leverage the other tools that we had. The Desirability toolkit would go out to that particular audience, so we could get information back. They were using the Send a Smile tool. They were occasionally being surveyed for certain issues because we were still developing the product while they were still working on the beta. So it's the time frames and sort of the activities happening simultaneously gets really tight, which is why we have to do automation in terms of as much automation as we can to get feedback from customers. We also did some international deployments as well because, again, we were looking at specific issues of coming back. We had to be, our beta programs, I said, this is where we all had to understand what was happening because there were bugs we were feeding back to the development team that really were code bugs. Because, again, the nice part about having a consumer audience was they didn't know really what they could and should do with the system, and that was fine by us. And so often they would hit problems that our technical beta groups wouldn't necessarily run into because they wouldn't try some of the things our more inexperienced users would do. And then another audience that we had to look at was enterprise. Of course, enterprise accounts for a considerable amount of our audience. And so, again, we had to have, this was a continuous process from the beginning of the cycle throughout until we got towards the beta end. One of the areas that we knew was important was productivity. That's one thing we're always being asked about. You know, how will this impact productivity? Our office gets asked this question constantly. And so it's something that we really have to understand and investigate. But while somebody on my team was trying to understand productivity, what she learned from working with, again, it's the ecosystem of everybody involved, was one of the toughest issues they actually had was learning. It was like they assumed that they would be productive eventually, but how do you get people to that level of productivity? And so learning became something that we ended up paying more attention to this time. And so she talked with people in the field, and she also then started to talk with their customers as well, and said they were asking for, you know, what we really need is some kind of roadmap to just help us figure out how to do the training on things. And so eventually we developed something called the Enterprise Learning Framework, which is, it's a bridging the gap tool for enterprise users. And the this is, again, when you start to understand the whole ecosystem, you don't have to build everything directly into the product, but you have to know where the seams are to help people move across the experience. So there were a few things that we started to understand was, you know what, there's a time frame perspective in when people want to know about the product. Like, we couldn't deliver all the information on one shot. People aren't ready for it. There has to be a way of helping to explain to these enterprise users what's coming up. What should you know on the day of deployment? What should you know afterwards? You know, to get to the tips and tricks. And so we came up with the plan around that. And this is available on a website that really helps people go through and select topics that would be relevant for their audience. This is a tool for somebody who's doing the deployment rollout. But what also came back to us was very much with, well, we're rolling out Windows and Office at the same time. So, you know, and we were working on Windows, and this was one of those moments where you go, whoa, okay. So we worked with the Office team as well to get the combination together, because we'd gone out and started to talk with the people in the field. It was that's the unit that they operate in. They were looking at both at the same time, and so that really sort of made us think differently in terms of what we were delivering back. And so now we have this tool that said you can select the topics by what you're rolling out, whether it's one, both, separate. You can select the month that you're going. You can select the time frame that you actually want to communicate out to an audience. You can even select the particular audience as well in terms of information worker, influential information worker. So you can give them some information as a heads up, because again, once we start to study and understand the environment, you know what? It's good to get them on board and help them understand things ahead of the next step, because you know it'll help with the deployment. And then eventually, this little tool, what it does is it creates an email that has links to the help topics. I mean, it is not rocket science, this one, but the feedback from people in the field has just been like they've been extremely happy, and the feedback from the enterprises has been like, wow. Like, we really, like, it's so good to see this come out, because this will really help us. And so it's another place where it helped us go investigate further was because we started to try and figure out, well, what would be useful for people to know at particular stages. Julie, working on this, could work with the engineers to understand what was going well, what were particular issues in the actual development of the features. We then were able to work with the assistance team that creates content, and we started to realize, wow, there's a lot of topics that they weren't going to cover because we hadn't made the full integration across the experience. And so eventually it became a very tight experience across each of these areas. So that gives you some perspective of sort of all the different elements we had to pull together in the development of Vista. And I said the areas I've mostly talked about are the three outside boxes here. And as we move forwards, we're just going to continually get more and more feedback from customers from a variety of sources. I've actually recently changed positions now, and I work on something that is looking at customer satisfaction and how we can understand that and relate it back to the development teams and get them to respond in different ways. And so, but what I'm also experiencing is seeing another set of tools that the field team uses and our product support team uses that are generating a lot of information about customer behavior, customer experience, customer issues. And each group is developing a lot of tools that gradually you need to be able to integrate and understand, sort of to provide the rich picture. And that, I think, is one of the future directions that we've got to think about is the volume of information coming back is great. I don't think we've ever been so in touch with customers as we are right now, but the challenge is now getting on top of it to be able to make smart decisions. And so I think that's sort of one of the areas that you'll start to see sort of different HCI user research usability projects and research happening and heading in. So that gives you the summary.
Okay. I'll start with since you just triggered by pointing out the thing about Windows, and Office. For most users, those aren't separate experiences.
Yes.
Matter of fact, they have no idea which pieces are being done by which. And from a user interface designer point of view, you want to sort of do that whole experience together. You really want it to be coordinated and designed well. Justice Department doesn't have exactly that same idea. So what did you have to do in working with Office or not working with them that was forced by those issues?
One of the goals that we always have is particularly for our team and the design team, is we're allowed to be heads down and think about the experience. And so there's a strong collaboration between the research teams that are in Office and the interaction team and what we're doing in Windows. And so we have discussions about how to make the experience better. And then at a certain point, another group will then they will review what the plans are, what the expectations are in terms of what we can and what we can't do. And then it's the same with a lot of processes. You get to the optimal design, and then you then have to figure out what will work, whether that's from the engineering standpoint or whether it's from a legal standpoint. So that's sort of how we've been generally working through the process.
When you get down to finer level details, so for example, you hit a file browser dialog to open a file. That's one of those places you're using words, you think it's in Word, but actually you're pulling something from Windows.
Yes.
Do you design it to go to the Office 2007 standards, the way they do things, or do you have your own standards, or those?
For that particular one, this is where I do the I believe, because I may end up falling into that same category of user you're talking about who doesn't know where anything's coming from. But for Office 2007, it is pulling from the common file dialog. So it is pulling out from the Vista system.
So in that case, you have to. I'm trying to talk here before about the design for Office 2007,
yes,
which had a whole bunch of concepts
yeah,
that were interesting new ways of doing interface. And I was wondering if they were coming back and forth into the Vista.
No, it's like obviously if Windows Vista, it makes if Office is trying to use something like that, then it's available to others to use. What we will do is what we're trying to do is understand behaviors that affect enterprise users or affect a certain group of users and make recommendations around that for the benefit of all users trying to use that type of dialogue. In fact, one of the challenges when we're actually doing the holistic experiences of looking at things in terms of enterprise scenarios of using applications, I want to save folders, I want to save files offline, is to even do that test with users, we have to decide what kind of software we want to put on the machine to simulate the environment, and that always becomes like discussion points about what types of products we should be using to even look at things like that.
Actually, one question along that line, I'm just curious. So you had the example of the task of uploading photos and sharing them and stuff. Do you try to stay within your own boundaries, or do you say, what if they're a Flickr user?
That kind of comes into that similar conversation as personas. Like personas are there, they never try to describe all the users you're trying to go for. They're there to just keep everybody in a common ground. When we're running evaluations, we might use different types of users, but that will be in the details of the specs that come at the feature level of how to accommodate and deal with different types of users like that. And then we'll at some point we'll also, that's the combination of also looking at stuff that's going on when we do the field work, which is where we get the real life of people using whatever they choose to use. We're paying attention to as much of that feedback as we are to what we have in the labs. So it's complex to try and make those decisions. But we'll always look at, I said, if we run a user through one particular pass, one thing that we always have to remember is to provide the recommendations that also look at other particular paths as we go through things. So I don't know if it answers it directly, but we have spent many hours on on those types of discussions whenever we're looking at different parts of the UI.
What would you say are like top 3 things that changed in Vista based on the user feedback?
Top 3 things. storage model has changed significantly. Oh, actually, I should say that. The storage model was going to change extremely significantly, but based on user feedback, didn't change as much as the intention was.
So based on user feedback, not on engineering considerations.
It was a combination. Nearly everything is always a combination of feedback. So that was one particular area where we were like, looking at some of the new ideas, and it was, we just weren't sure how we were really going to get the users to where a new model was going to be. And so it was a powerful consideration in making those decisions. So that's definitely one particular area.
Between like search and folders?
Yes. Yeah, and whether we should be using folders or not. Another area is like in the control panel as well. Like there's a new model for the control panel, and this was sort of an area that, again, it's over time, like the complexities of your machines have really increased, and how do we make it still like easy to manage your own machines? And that's that same combination of providing flexibility, but also making it simple. And so there's a new model which is like, it's very much a search model that if you type in what you think you need from the control panel, it will actually help bubble up the things that are relevant to you, rather than actually having to go through all the specifics of pecking through each particular area. And that's the type of thing that there are many iterations that go into sort of the actual design, the subtleties of the design, but that's another particular area that's come up. The photo and video experience, it said each one of our experiences, we had particular goals around, and sort of we were able to influence it was easy access to some of the editing features and functionalities. We'd done some great work, but then suddenly we realized some of the entry points into some of the areas weren't quite discoverable enough, so we were able to sort of move some things around to be able to get better discoverability around particular issues. So there's like each area we've had a hand in moving things along.
How much that kind of thing, in movies, do you do competitive benchmarking, where you like get users in using Axe and iMovie? They do what they like and so on.
Yes, we do. And it's generally it'll happen. So obviously, when a competitor product comes out, maybe we'll do an evaluation, or maybe we'll do a lab study. Maybe we'll do just an evaluation and review of sort of what's going on. So that happens, and we'll then consider sort of how we're doing in particular areas. But for the most part, because we've already been in a certain direction for Vista for quite a while, though we've been sort of observing what's going on in particular areas, is like we had our goals set up front. In fact, actually around user experience, the goals that we were most interested in tracking to, we've had in place since we started to work on Vista. And again, from a user experience, from the user research perspective, it's like, we're not always after the extremely high-end, cool, glamorous, extra features. We're after the basic set, because I'm sure sort of all of you realize that there are just some of the basics that we need to do a lot of improvements on, and that's where we sort of invested time and energy. And then there are some decisions about what other things to invest in to sort of really add to the experience. But at the end of the day, the majority of our time has been spent in really focusing down on like getting the core basics right.
Could you expand on the need to submit audit reports to achieve the kind of time that you wanted to see?
Let's think. For a start, for some of the team, for bug reports, yes, as stuff is coming in, if it was coming in through one of our beta tools, often the feedback there, sometimes it was just bugs that were coming into us, and we had to try and help understand what the issue was. Then so we had to understand what the issue was, make sure we could do the repro, and then assign it, so we definitely got the bug fixed. There were other types of issues that would come in when we're looking at all our data. So somebody on my team would be looking at photos, that's their area of responsibility. And so anything to do with photos would go to them. Now, our bug management tool is the way that people often organize their workloads. So now they can see a new issue that came in from a user that was reporting a particular challenge with not finding a part of the UI, or where's this functionality gone? I can't find it anymore. Like, that would be sort of an instant request. Now, that alone might not generate a particular bug, like we have to fix this because maybe it's not significant enough standing alone, but because the person is familiar with all the issues with photos, it's evidence that backs up maybe another issue that they were trying to track, and then we can put the issues together and then assign a bug, because they may already have a recommendation as to how to fix that problem, but we haven't just got quite the weight of data from the customer that we need to help make the decision to go fix it. So it's a way of managing all the different feedback that is coming in, and very sort of as seamlessly as we can, pushing that set of data to the next level. Does that?
No.
Yeah.
Is there any way for me to access my own personal feedback panel information? Or a good way, I guess?
At the moment, for the types of work that the user research team does, no. We've thought about, for a variety of reasons, it would be good. For some of the beta work, with more the technical beta panels, I actually don't know. I know it's been discussed, and it's desirable to be able to make, so information that you're transmitting, you can then see what's happening with the different issues and such. But I'm not familiar.
Even from an opportunistic standpoint, it would be interesting. I'd love to see how I'm using the computer and what areas are taking up time and where I could most effectively.
Yes. Yeah, no, we've thought about that, but we don't. Our instrumentation side is actually, we don't have an external facing at the moment. No, but we know people will be curious about that. So, yeah.
You have a wish list for the successor for Vista? Like in terms of user experience, or that you didn't get to maybe in Vista, or that you'd love?
Oh, I think it's great just the way it is. What can I say? I moved on. I finished. Oh, there will always be new things that can certainly be worked on, it's the integration of the experience. I mean, that's the challenge that I think we have is again, in my earlier days at Microsoft, it's so easy. Didn't feel easy at the time, but it was so easy because. Yeah, here's the box. It was very isolated, not dependent on other things. You put it in, it works, as long as it could print, and you were done. Whereas today, the combinations and the expectations of, well, I'd really like to take that information with me, on the cell phone and plug this into that. And then, if I take my laptop to somebody else's house, I want to share my photos, but I want it to display on their, TV set. Like, the combinations are going up. And then that actually comes back to the sort of, how do we evaluate the best paths with users, or like our test matrix goes up. I know the actual quality assurance testers, they have a hard time with all the combinations that are possible to do the actual tests on, but we get impacted by the same thing. So that's going to be a challenge.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, do you expect that the next major changes will be a re-release of a new operating system or a service pack?
I don't know what the plans are. Yeah. So I don't know what the plans are beyond where we are right now. We're just still celebrating we RTM'd last week.
To follow up what you said before, though, will the next version, you think, be more about the cross-device user experience as opposed to the on the desktop or laptop user experience?
I don't know what the direction is going to be on the next version. As that, I think there's a great awareness that integration is a critical experience. So I don't know how that gets prioritized into the next set of things.
I'm interested. I think it's. I'm really interested in the seams and how you're going to make sure that it's a smooth transition for everybody. And personally, I've had a couple people whose opinion I really respect tell me how great Windows, the next version, Vista and Office is, and for me that has a lot of sway. And I'm wondering if you guys, and I think in the organizations that might be the case also, have you focused at all on the grassroots element of the transitions?
Yes, I mean some. there are expectations around different adoption curves, but I'm expecting sort of things like that to be going on constantly, where people will start to use it and then discover things that they really like about it that makes their life easier. And also early adopters, the other part is there's some things in here that will help support. If you're trying to provide support to another person, that might make it easier, so you'll start to be pleased when other people are sort of getting Vista, because it will make your life easier in terms of providing support for other people. But we don't have any. On the research front, we haven't particularly looked directly at sort of that influential model.
I was wondering who at Microsoft has really the final say on the interaction design? Is that your team, or are you more in a consultancy role?
There are many people who would claim they have the final decision on the interaction model. It's not my team. We work very closely with the design team that does an awful lot to drive the model of the interaction. And then again, it's every decision is a sort of you have a lot of different factors to trade off. So when we started this, the design team did an awful lot of interaction model design of how experiences should work. That's where we're providing feedback to, going, hey, that looks great, that we believe will work, and sort of some other areas that we didn't think. Then you have the development team going, wow, great, we can do those four, can't do that bit. That would be a challenge, We'll try it. If we don't get there, we'll have to drop back to a different particular model. And so it's the combination of what criteria did we set up initially, and that's where marketing might also come into play as well, as to what do they want, what were the couple of areas that they were very keen on being able to point to. We said then we'll have our criteria in place, as well as like, whoa, you better not go with that model because you'll damage these 3 areas over here. And so it's quite a combination, but essentially like the design team had an awful, they had ownership of a lot of the actual visuals, the overall flow and engagement models. So like, if you're talking to an engineer, they would probably have a different answer, but I would go with the interaction design team actually had a lot of influence over the design of the model. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about the seams that you found in your organization between the teams that you were partnering with, and how you identified those obstacles and overcame them.
Let's see. Well, when we were developing initially the tasks for users, we had to bring in the teams that we knew would contribute to the experiences. So I said for that first one, we would have had the people in from the photos team, the email team, the storage team, to make sure they all recognize that, hey, look, you all contribute to this particular experience, across the board. And if any of you don't deliver to the user in a certain way, there'll be issues. And one in particular was, we were able, where the process was like, it was apparent it was working, was for one of the small business scenarios was to do with faxing, faxing was also a challenging scenario for us to even test internally, because of some of the requirements small businesses have are hard to set up actually in a corporation. And so we set up the faxing experience, and then we started to realize as people were trying to fax, they just wanted to change their image a bit. They wanted to crop their image. And what we hadn't realized was the team that created that particular part of the UI had dropped the cropping feature because what they were working on didn't seem like a priority. And so we were able to say, you know what, look, if we go through this whole experience, they're failing the task, not because what the fax team were doing, but because the team where they called this UI from another team was coming hadn't actually got one of the elements in. They had it, I think they had it earlier, and then it had disappeared. And so there we were able to go, wait a minute, and go back to the team and help say, look, we have an agreement up front, these were the goals we had in mind. this is a priority task for this particular group, even though it's not your priority for the product, it is. And so the feature came back in. And so there were times throughout several of these experiences where you'd go, wait a minute, which team owns this part of the UI? Because it really does, like UI can be called from all different parts of the system. And because we were watching things at quite a granular level, we were able to follow up with particular teams. So that's just one example of sort of how we may have gone about doing it. Yeah.
Sounds like team goals and product goals sometimes would not exactly mesh properly. Is that accurate?
Maybe. But it's that. How do you mesh experiences with engineering process when experiences are very fluid? And so the fact that we now have this, because we were tracking experiences, and again, between the design and user experience team and also the user assistance team, we operate and are managed an experience level. We were able to identify a lot of the themes and help with the prioritization. Whereas when you're in the actual engineering team, they have to create priorities themselves and they have a certain way they're operating. And that's where they may have a couple of these additional goals, because again, when you look at things, like the priorities of, like looking at the personas, that they keep most of the time, most of the people can talk the same language, but then there are reasons to optimize, because then that leads into, wow, there's many more combinations than we can actually pay attention to. So that's where you get sometimes you have to recommunicate what the goals are and then come to sort of consensus on some particular issues. So, but it's always, the more that we were able to set up in advance what we thought the goals were, and to be clear about how we were measuring things, to give people clear objectives and sort of identify how they're tracking to, it allows the conversations to happen. It's all part of the communications experience as well.
Okay, thank you.
For information on other online Stanford seminars and courses, please visit study.stanford.edu.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.